Dr. Richard Sloan is everything a modern hospital would want as its face. Handsome, brilliant, and ambitious to a fault. He saved a senator's wife last month and gave a TED-style talk about empathy in medicine. Yet, in reality, Richard has little empathy to give. He storms down the hall, complaining to his assistant about budget cuts, outdated MRI machines, and the hospital's ridiculous obsession with charity patients. "Half these people can't even afford the air in this place," he mutters. "We need real investors, not sob stories." Meanwhile, the janitor, Luis, quietly empties a bin behind him. He hears every word but says nothing. Later that evening, after the night shift begins, Luis returns to his small custodial office tucked behind the boiler room. Inside, it's surprisingly neat, cleaner than any hospital administrator's desk. On the wall above his mop rack is a faded photograph. A young girl, smiling in a hospital bed, holding a teddy bear. Next to it, an unopened letter marked "Return to Sender." He sits, takes out a worn notebook, and begins writing. Day 47, still no sign of Dr. Sloan remembering. Still no sign of the board noticing the truth. Catherine's foundation transfer is scheduled for next quarter. I'll keep working quietly. The money must help them, even if they never know who it's from. The handwriting is elegant, deliberate, not what you'd expect from a janitor. He closes the notebook, exhales deeply, and whispers, "For you, Mihija." The next morning, chaos strikes. A pipe bursts in the main wing, flooding the pediatric corridor. Luis rushes to the scene, trying to stop the leak before it reaches the electrical wiring. Dr. Sloan, mid-rounds, sees the commotion. "What are you doing, Alvarez?" he shouts. "You'll make it worse." "I'm trying to shut the valve, sir." "If we don't talk back to me. You think mopping floors makes you an engineer?" Nurses watch uneasy. Luis continues working, water soaking his uniform, face calm under pressure. Finally, he turns the valve, the leak stops. Applause breaks out quietly from a nearby nurse. But Dr. Sloan only sneers. "Next time, call maintenance," he says coldly. "You're just lucky you didn't break anything." Luis nods silently, but as Sloan walks away, his gaze hardens. He whispers under his breath, "If only you knew what was really broken, doctor." In the cafeteria, whispers spread among the staff. "Did you hear? That janitor knows things, like real things. Someone said he used to work in finance." "No way. He barely talks to anyone." Meanwhile, Dr. Sloan's assistant, Emily, is growing suspicious. She notices Luis spending a lot of time near the hospital foundation's donation wing. He's always near the plaque commemorating donors, the one that reads, "Funded by the Catherine Sloan Medical Foundation." Emily asks her boss about it. "Doctor, is that foundation related to you?" Richard chuckles. "No relation, just a coincidence. Some philanthropist who donated through an anonymous trust. Never met them." But his eyes dart away just slightly. That night, Luis walks through the empty hospital halls, pushing his mop under the glow of emergency lights. He stops at the pediatric wing, room 312. The bed is empty now, but he touches the headboard gently, like visiting a grave. A nurse catches him there. "You okay, Luis?" He nods. "Just remembering someone who spent her last night here." "Was she family?" He smiles faintly. "She was my whole world." Flashback years earlier. A girl in that same room, hooked to an oxygen mask, laughs as a doctor hands her a paper crane. Her name, Catherine Alvarez. Her father, younger, suit and tie, a corporate man, stands by her bedside. He had promised her the best doctors, the best care. But when the bills came, the hospital refused extended treatment. Insurance delays, policy limits, bureaucracy. By the time he found another facility, it was too late. Catherine died at age 9. The hospital, Sloan General, the same institution now bearing her name. Back in the present, Dr. Sloan hosts a press conference in the hospital atrium. The media flashes lights, microphones everywhere. He announces a major renovation grant from an undisclosed donor, money that will transform the hospital's infrastructure. Reporters ask, "Doctor, Who's behind this generosity? He smirks. Let's just say, the hospital has powerful friends. In the background, Luis mops the floor, quietly listening. A drop of water lands on the reflective tile. He wipes it slowly, his eyes filled with restrained emotion. He knows the truth. The donor is him. The grant came from the Catherine Alvarez Foundation. His daughter's legacy? Built from the fortune he made after leaving his corporate life to honor her name. And now, the very man who once denied her treatment stands basking in the spotlight. Luis exhales, whispers, "Enjoy it while it lasts, doctor. Tomorrow, everything changes." Night again. Luis unlocks his small office, pulls out a folder marked confidential. Sloan General Foundation, trustee documents. He studies them carefully, his reflection caught in the window. Lightning flashes outside. He looks at the last line of a legal document he is holding. Primary benefactor, Luis Alvarez. He closes it and says softly, almost as if speaking to his late daughter, "You'll be proud tomorrow, mi amor. The truth will finally breathe." The next morning broke with the dull hum of fluorescent lights flickering awake. The hospital was already breathing, the smell of antiseptic and coffee mixing in the air, the steady rhythm of heels and heart monitors echoing through its veins. Luis arrived earlier than usual, his mop bucket rolling beside him with a quiet squeak that seemed to mark each passing thought. He looked calm, even peaceful, though something in his eyes betrayed the storm building inside him. He had been invisible for months, another face among those who cleaned up the aftermath of miracles and mistakes. But today was different. Today, the truth would begin to surface. As he walked past the surgical ward, a nurse named Emily stopped him. "Luis? The board's meeting today. Big news, apparently. You heard anything?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe something worth cleaning up afterward." Emily chuckled, unaware of the weight behind his words. "You're funny, Luis. You should talk more. People like you always seem to know more than you let on." His eyes softened. Sometimes knowing too much is what makes people stop listening. He continued toward the elevator, each step deliberate, as if counting down to a moment only he understood. Upstairs, the boardroom was a different world. Polished oak tables, chrome coffee dispensers, the faint arrogance of perfume and expensive suits. Dr. Richard Sloan stood at the head, rehearsing his opening remarks for the meeting. He glanced at his reflection in the window, straightened his tie, and said quietly to himself, "They'll remember this day, Richard. The hospital's new wing will bear your name." He smiled. At that moment, the door opened and a man from the finance department entered with a file. "Dr. Sloan, the board wanted the updated donor list for this morning's agenda. It includes the latest confirmation from the Alvarez Foundation." Sloan nodded impatiently. "Just leave it there." The man placed the folder on the table and left. The doctor barely looked at it, not realizing that inside was the first loose thread of his undoing. Downstairs, Luis took a break in the cafeteria. He sat alone by the window, watching raindrops trace patterns down the glass. Outside, the city blurred into shades of gray. He could see the reflection of the hospital's motto etched into the glass door. For compassion, for care, for every life. He let out a soft, bitter laugh. The last time he'd seen that phrase was on the hospital brochure he'd clutched while pleading with the administration years ago, when Catherine's medical bills had surpassed his insurance coverage, when he was told policy constraints wouldn't allow further treatment. Now, decades later, he had rebuilt his life, sold his company, started a foundation in her name, and secretly, quietly, purchased controlling shares in the very hospital that once failed her. But Luis never came here for revenge. He came for closure, for truth to stand where lies once ruled. Still, that didn't mean he wouldn't let the truth cut where it needed to. By noon, the boardroom buzzed with conversation. Dr. Sloan took his seat at the center, flashing a practiced smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, as you know," he began, "our facility's growth in recent years is thanks to the generosity of several key donors, including the Alvarez Foundation. Their trust has allowed us to expand care and—" He was interrupted by the soft creak of the door. Luis Alvarez stepped inside. Every head turned. A few board members frowned, recognizing him as the janitor. Dr. Sloan's smile faltered. "Excuse me," Sloan said sharply. "This meeting is for board members only. Maintenance can wait until—" Luis raised a folded envelope. "Forgive the intrusion, doctor, but I believe this belongs here." The room went silent. Sloan's irritation turned to confusion. "What are you talking about?" Luis stepped forward, placed the envelope on the table, and said evenly, "It's the updated transfer document, the one confirming new ownership of the Alvarez Foundation." One of the board members, Mrs. Preston, adjusted her glasses and opened the envelope. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God! What is it?" Sloan demanded. She looked up. "According to this, Mr. Luis Alvarez is the sole trustee and founder of the Alvarez Foundation." The room froze. Sloan blinked. "That's impossible. He's a janitor." Luis met his gaze, calm and steady. "I was, once, before this place taught me how easily people forget compassion when power blinds them." A heavy silence hung in the air. Sloan's composure cracked slightly. "You expect us to believe this act? Some elaborate joke?" Luis slid another document across the table, a notarized statement of ownership, signatures, seals, his name printed clearly at the bottom. "I built the foundation from the ground up," he said quietly, "in memory of my daughter, Catherine Alvarez. She died in this hospital in room 312. You were still a resident here then, Dr. Sloan?" For the first time, Sloan's face drained of color. He remembered the case. The little girl with the soft brown eyes, the one whose father had begged for an extra week of treatment. He swallowed hard. That was years ago. We did what we could. The policies killed her," Luis interrupted. His voice steady but trembling with grief restrained too long. "She needed care. You told me, 'We can't do charity work here.' Those words never left me." A few board members looked down, ashamed. Luis continued, his tone quieter now. "I made a promise that day, that no one else would be turned away here again, and I've kept that promise. Every year, my foundation has funded your free care programs, your expansions, your pay raises. But you, Dr. Sloan," he paused, "you never learned compassion, even after taking credit for mine." Sloan's jaw tightened. "You're lying. You're trying to humiliate me." Luis stepped closer. "You humiliated yourself, doctor. I just gave you the mirror." The room filled with whispers. Emily, standing by the door, looked stunned. She had always thought there was something dignified about the quiet janitor. Now she understood. Sloan tried to regain control. "Even if that's true, what do you want? Applause? Forgiveness?" Luis looked at him with something resembling pity. "Forgiveness isn't mine to give. But maybe the hospital will remember what it was meant to stand for." He turned to the board. "My foundation's future support will depend on one condition. This facility will never again deny treatment because of money. Not one patient. Ever." Mrs. Preston nodded slowly. "You have our word, Mr. Alvarez." Sloan glared at her. "You can't make decisions without consulting me." Mrs. Preston's voice hardened. "You're no longer the center of this institution, Richard. The man you belittled is the one keeping it alive." Luis gathered his documents and turned to leave. For a brief moment he stopped beside Sloan. The doctor avoided his gaze, eyes flicking toward the polished floor. Luis said softly, "You know, doctor, I used to believe people like you couldn't change. But maybe you can. Maybe you'll remember what it means to heal someone, not just treat them." Then he left the room. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded louder than any argument could have. Sloan stood frozen, staring at the empty doorway. His reflection in the boardroom glass looked different now. Smaller, lonelier, stripped of the authority he thought made him whole. Later that night, Luis walked through the quiet corridors again. The hospital slept under the dim glow of hallway lights. He paused by room 312 where it had all begun. He whispered, "It's done, Mihija. They'll help people now. The way they should have helped you." For a long moment, he stood there, listening to the hum of life around him. Monitors beeping, footsteps echoing softly, laughter drifting from the nurse's station. He smiled faintly, tears glinting in his eyes. Then, without a word, he picked up his mop and continued down the hall. Behind him, the light over room 312 flickered once, as if answering him. Morning light spilled through the hospital's tall windows, washing the corridors in pale gold. The same place that once buzzed with pride and impatience now felt strangely still, like a heart catching its breath after years of beating too fast. Dr. Richard Sloan walked alone through the east wing, his white coat hanging open, the rhythm of his shoes slow, unsteady. Overnight, something inside him had cracked. Not a breakdown, but a painful awakening. Everywhere he went, people avoided his eyes. The nurses who once scrambled at his orders now offered only polite nods. Even the interns, once dazzled by his reputation, whispered quietly when he passed. He reached the window that overlooked the courtyard, where patients sometimes sat with their families. A janitor pushed a broom across the tiles below. For a fleeting second, Richard thought it was Luis. Then he remembered Luis had resigned that morning. No headlines, no farewell speech. Just a short letter left with human resources. My work here is done. Keep caring for people. That's all the wealth I ever wanted. Richard folded the memory like paper and tucked it into his chest, where guilt pressed hard. He went back to his office and opened his laptop. His inbox overflowed with board messages, financial restructuring, new ethics committees, policy changes. The first line of every email was the same. In accordance with Mr. Alvarez's conditions, he closed the computer. The words blurred in his mind. Mr. Alvarez. For the first time, Richard said the name aloud. Luis Alvarez. It sounded heavier than he expected. He remembered the day that little girl, Catherine, had been transferred out of his ward. He had told her father the numbers, the regulations, the limits. He'd convinced himself it was out of his hands. But now he saw it clearly. The choice had always been his. A knock on the door broke his thoughts. Emily stepped in quietly. Doctor, the foundation just approved the new patient care fund. It's going to cover full treatment for low-income families. Richard nodded slowly. Luis did that. She hesitated. He believed you'd do the right thing with it. That stung more than accusation. Later that afternoon, Richard walked down to the maintenance level, the part of the hospital most doctors never saw. The air smelled faintly of detergent and metal. Luis's small office door was still open. Inside, the shelves were bare except for one framed photograph left behind. A young girl with a teddy bear. Richard stood there for a long time. Finally, he sat down in the empty chair and looked at the picture. I'm sorry, he whispered, for what we did, for who I was. The words weren't enough, but they were all he had. He noticed a notebook on the desk, the one Luis used to jot down cleaning schedules. He opened it out of reflex, then froze. Inside were pages of careful handwriting. Thoughts about the hospital, ideas for improvements, notes on kindness. At the very end, one line was written in bolder ink. Compassion is the only medicine that never expires. Richard closed the book and felt something inside him settle, like dust finally finding its place after a long storm. Weeks passed. The hospital began to change in small but profound ways. Patients who couldn't pay were no longer turned away. Staff meetings started with moments of reflection rather than budget reports. The pediatric wing, once neglected, was being renovated into the Catherine Alvarez Children's Center, funded entirely by the foundation. And Richard was no longer chief surgeon. He had asked the board to step down from the position himself. Titles don't heal people, he had said. Hands do. Now he worked in the pediatric unit not as a figurehead but as a doctor again. He spent more time with his patients, learning their stories, their fears. Some days he sat by their bedsides long after visiting hours, just listening. The staff noticed. He's different, they whispered. He actually smiles now. One evening, after a long surgery, Richard walked through the courtyard. The sky was fading into twilight, the windows glowing like lanterns. He heard the sound of a mop gliding across the tiles. A new janitor, a young man, was cleaning the fountain area. He nodded respectfully as Richard passed. Richard smiled back. "Thank you," he said softly. The janitor looked surprised, then smiled in return. "Just doing my job, sir." Richard paused, turned back, and added, "It's more important than most people think." He walked away, the words echoing faintly behind him. In the boardroom upstairs, the portrait of the hospital's founder had been replaced. Now, in its place hung a new photograph. Luis Alvarez, smiling humbly beside a child's drawing of a heart. Beneath it, an engraved plaque read, "In memory of Catherine Alvarez, whose light healed this place." Months later, a letter arrived at Richard's office. No return address, just his name written in careful script. Inside was a single note. "Dear Dr. Sloan, healing begins when pride ends. I'm glad to see you've started. L.A." Richard smiled, eyes damp. He folded the letter neatly and placed it inside Luis's old notebook. Then he turned off the lights, stood by the window, and watched as the city lights blinked like distant stars. Somewhere out there, a man named Luis Alvarez was walking freely. Perhaps cleaning another hallway, perhaps not. But leaving behind a lesson that would never fade. That night, in the quiet halls of the hospital, a nurse paused by room 312. For a brief second, she swore she saw a soft glow through the window, just a flicker, like the reflection of candlelight. She smiled, whispering to herself, "Someone's watching over this place."